Good afternoon. This is Mary Robertson, and thank you for joining the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit for today's webinar on clearing up the confusion regarding JST and ACE transcripts and other fun stuff. We especially thank our funders, Lumina and Strata. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do. I'm Mary Robertson, Senior Director of Communications and Marketing for the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. I'm filling in today for my colleague Sarah Appel, who's the MCMC Manager. A few housekeeping items. Please use the chat feature to submit your questions. We'll do our best to address these during the presentation, and we'll also be sending out the slides after the presentation. A general overview of the MCMC. The mission of the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit is to facilitate an interstate partnership of 13 states and to translate competencies acquired by veterans through military training and experiences toward college credentials. States exchange information and share best practices in the areas of articulation of credit, certification and licensure, communication, and data and technology. We do this through these project goals: assist states and post-secondary institutions in aiding military-connected students with critical life transitions from the military to post-secondary education, and then from post-secondary education to civilian employment. Increase post-secondary education completion rates by creating models for the consistent, transparent, and effective awarding of credit for military training and experience that can be scaled regionally and nationally, thereby lowering the cost of education and reducing the time to completion. And finally, establish a strong network of support, communication, documentation, and data and collection among institutions and organizations for the purpose of promoting shared interests and tracking the efficacy of efforts to enhance military-connected students' educational success. And this is done through these 4 knowledge communities of articulation of academic credit, communication and outreach, data systems and technology, licensure and certification. And today's presenter is Michele Spires. She's the Director of Military Programs for the American Council on Education. And we welcome her, and I'll let you take it away.
Why, thank you, Mary. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for the hard work of MCMC. Welcome to all of our web participants. I can see you're still logging in. Wonderful. I'm going to definitely be looking in that chat box to see what questions are coming. And as we get started, I want to make sure everyone has a chance to jot down my email, my cell phone, text. I travel a lot. Home for me is Colorado, but this week I'm actually in DC, believe it or not. A little bit of framing. The American Council on Education. We are undergoing some strategic realignment, new vision with our President Ted Mitchell, focusing on higher education for the nation's future. This is kind of our new strategic construct, revamping our core values, but also thinking about our strategic commitments, particularly that in our lane where we are all working together is equity, access, and completion, and thinking about that in the lens of student success. So as we're thinking about student success and the work that ACE is doing, but also the work you're doing with MCMC, with your academic institutions, when you think about the work of evaluating learning in post-traditional environments, we have to find ways to validate the learning, make sure that there's quality assurance and components of that validation of learning, and thinking about our post-traditional students in a variety of populations and their equity and completion. And that may be a degree, a certificate, a credential, a learning nugget. I know that I have been doing some quick TED Talks, which are just kind of helping me as I travel along the way, so learning that's coming in all different shapes and sizes. Now, the American Council on Education has been working with the Department of Defense since the mid-1940s as a contractor. Right? ACE is the vendor, the Department of Defense is the contractor, to conduct evaluations of courses and occupations, to do technical support and outreach, ta-da, here we are today, and to manage data through our military guide, and through support to our joint services transcript in terms of quality assurance. And what we want to clarify today underneath the scope of those contracts are the eligibility of courses and occupations, because learning comes in all shapes and sizes across the services. But there are some criteria of eligibility, and the criteria are built within the scope of contract. So let's jump right in here. There has to be a central authority. There has to be formal individual assessments of learning. Those can take place in terms of, it could be exams, it can be papers, there can be rubrics, it can be go, no-go. But with those assessments, there has to be firm identification of the student, again, under our MILEVAL contract. So in a distance delivered course or something that is asynchronous, the military has to validate to the American Council on Education how they know the student is the student that's taking that assessment. Also, within the learning requirements for courses, there has to be a minimum of 45 academic hours. So we're factoring out things like, oh, part of your job and part of your course is to have 3 hours of physical conditioning. That's a job expectation and a school expectation, but it's not part of the academic curriculum for assessment. We would factor that out. In addition, in the scope of contract, we are looking at first priority enlisted learners, first enlisted courses. Then we would move up to the second tier priority for warrant officers or limited duty officers for our sea services, the Navy and the Coast Guard. And the teeny tiny tap of the priority for scheduling has to do with our commissioned officers. Now, where confusion comes in, where it can get really complex, is that each branch of service has a liaison to the contract, or what we call a service program manager. And their job is to kind of coordinate what that central authority looks like, what should be evaluated for courses. The American Council on Education does not select courses or occupations for that matter for evaluations. And sometimes it's because military courses don't meet the basic criteria. Sometimes it's changing too much. There are a number of factors involved. Now, what does central authority mean? This is pretty important. This is military-centric education and training. And for the most part, each branch of service is going to have a liaison that is representing the interest of that centralized authority. So as you can see, and I'm looking over in the participants web box, if you are a military veteran of the Army, let me see some hand raises over there. Do we have any hand raises popping up? Any? That's what I thought. Let's throw in Marines. We got some Marines out there. Let me see the hand raising. I can see. Navy, shout out. I have to put a shout out for Air Force. My husband is retired Air Force. Whoop, whoop. How about Coast Guard? Do we have any Coast Guard veterans out there or family members? No? So for those of you that really chimed in, you can think back to those days of when you went to that formal training and education experience that all goes through kind of like a main campus. And this is really critical to validating that military-centric training and confirming what we call the ownership of the course. Who owns the curriculum? Who owns the course? I'm pausing to see if there are any questions coming in at this point. Now, for courses, that makes perfect sense. And for the Air Force, it gets a little complex because we know, right? Raise your hand if you know why. Let me see. Community College of the Air Force is regionally accredited. Who knew that? Let me see your hands. Popping up some yellow out there. Excellent. I love it. Thanks for playing with me this afternoon. Yes, since the Air Force has a regionally accredited community college, when you think about the central authority and you think back to the criteria in terms of the tiers, right? When you're thinking about the tiers of eligibility, for the Air Force, most of the courses we're evaluating are falling in that teeny tiny top of the tier for those commissioned officers. So moving forward about occupations, we kick the Air Force completely out. Off they go into the wild blue yonder. And that's because Air Force occupation codes align with Community College of the Air Force and are mapped through those associate pathways, and then of course to the baccalaureate partnerships that the Air Force has built. So when you think about course eligibility, now we have Army eligibility for occupations. And for the Army and the Marine Corps, it's enlisted starting at the E6 level. And the Marine Corps validates their jobs and skill level, so that's the 30 skill level, or basically the E6 level. We will also evaluate warrant officers, and those are service members who were previously enlisted that moved up into a technical position and officer role into the warrant officer community that have enlisted experience in that pathway. For the Navy and the Coast Guard, we actually start the evaluations for the enlisted from the E4 pay grade, and that's because part of the process of evaluating, we can actually look at the promotion and advancement examinations. That's a conversation for a different day. We're not going to deep dive into the content, scope, rigor, breadth, and depth of the curriculum. What we're doing is framing who's eligible for a course review and an occupation review under the scope of the military evaluations contract with Department of Defense. So when you're thinking about this, we can also do limited duty officers or warrant officers for the Navy. And again on the Navy, they have special jobs called NECs, Navy Enlisted Classifications, where there are formal classes that Navy sailors would complete. Kind of like when you think about, and how many of you out there participating in this web have a bucket on their job duties description that says, and other duties as assigned? Does anybody have that in their job description? Let me see. Perfect. I'm seeing probably about everybody raising their hand on that. Except in our other duties as assigned, rarely do we get formal training on it. A lot of times it's pick it up, rock and roll, learn how to move forward. The Coast Guard mirrors very closely the Navy, with the exception of our special accommodation to evaluate pilot designators. So your pilot, your co-pilot, your navigator. Those are the job roles and functions. And that has to do with the academic criteria for the Coast Guard, where degrees are not required. So we can actually deep dive and kind of evaluate the learning that's occurring on the job within those designators. So thinking about criteria, I'm actually going to go back a slide, 2 slides, to reinforce. There are criteria for courses. Centralized authority is a huge piece. It has to be vetted through their formal main campus, if you will. And then for occupations, it has to be within the 4 services of the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, and Coast Guard. We're not touching any officer work, and we're not touching anything Air Force related. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to look for questions. We've been doing this work since the mid-1950s on courses, and it was in 1974 when we first started the occupation, the job assessment for learning. Now the challenge is we're aligning learning right now to academic credit recommendations. Maybe in a magic crystal ball in the future we'll see aligning some additional competencies that might align to workforce, but right now the focus is on academic credit recommendations. Now, in 1974, our sister program, the College Credit Recommendation Service, started to model after the work we were doing in military by looking at the learning that's occurring on the job, kind of in what we call the corporate sector. But that being said, our corporate sector can include government and state agencies, along with big Fortune 500 companies and training providers. We also evaluate and assess learning for tests such as CLEP and DSST. So when you think about our corporate clients and you think about your military connected learner, any Guard or reservists that you can think of within your campus community, maybe you yourself are a Guard or Reserve. Let me see those hands going up just when you thought you were going to sit back and not play with me on this webinar. Thank you, Nicholas. I see the hand raising. Awesome. So when you think about the learning portfolio for your military connected community, there may be some experiences. Maybe, for example, that individual is in aviation maintenance through the Marine Corps, but they've also done some civilian work working with Jiffy Lube. They've got a lot of management leadership experience through their corporate Jiffy Lube University. There may be a broader portfolio of learning. So unless the organization is very military-centric, as defined by that central authority under the training and commands, the learning would be assessed and evaluated through our College Credit Recommendation Service or our credit program. So when you think about the tools and resources and the data portals that would become available, let's start with the easiest hanging fruit that we have right here, Community College of the Air Force, because they are regionally accredited, just like your academic institutions. They're SACS accredited. So to get more information, you literally have to go into their college catalog. There's a secured portal where the learner has to log in to have transcripts sent, just like you would on your college campus community. Air Force, got it covered. Everyone feeling good? Let me see those hands raising. Let me see some yellow. That's the color that pops up in the hand raised participation. Feeling good so far? I'm checking. I'm seeing. Now, because of the work we do with the American Council on Education with our credit program, on the corporate side of the house, we are involved and engaged in transcripting the learning that's occurring for our corporate clients with an official transcript service. And so this is kind of a snapshot. I know it's a little bit hard to read. There's some live examples on our website that you can take a look at, just kind of a unique test. It looks very similar to what you would see on a military transcript where ACE assigns a course number when the course was completed, kind of the course title, description, and completion. And it's very interesting because we are right now engaged in a very special project to look at enhancing and expanding transcripts, where we can look at a transcript in more digital learner space, where we have a transcript that's more academic based, or maybe a transcript that's more workforce based, unfolding those competencies. So I invite you to kind of take a look at workingtranscripts.credly.com. Credly is our partner working with this on a grant with Lumina, and as you can see the attributions here with our participating organizations. But when you think about those corporate clients that we just talked about and the government clients, they need an official record that could be sent to you. So you could have an airman that has a Community College of the Air Force transcript. Maybe before or after he or she enlisted in the Air Force, they took some training courses through Jiffy Lube, so they may have an ACE credit transcript moving forward. So you can think about that portfolio building up. Now, just like on the military side of the house, our sister program, Credit, has a data guide that you can search to get more details in comparison, because the transcript is a synopsis. It's short, it's sweet, but if you want more robust information about the learning and about the details of the assessment, you have to let your fingers do the walking to the National Guide. Now, if you have multiple screens or if you just want to minimize me, I'm fine with that. Let your fingers do the walking to the National Guide, www.acenet.edu/National Guide, and pull up our tool so you can kind of follow along and play. So at the very top are some tabs. You can see you can do a search by course or exam, information for colleges and universities. Here's how students would request transcripts, always a little FAQ about us, and some contact resources. So in a quick example to kind of help guide our discussion today, I clicked on the top tab, Find a Course or an Exam. And what's interesting here is going to show you all of the active and inactive clients. And there's multiple reasons why a client may be inactive. Maybe they're no longer offering that training. There are still criteria of eligibility very similar to the military side of the house on evaluating courses for college credit recommendation from our corporate clients. So that was just clicking the tab at the top, Find a Course or an Exam, kind of takes you to a scroll inventory. Now let's jump back a little to the next tab and show the Request Transcripts. This is a secured portal. We think about our JST portal, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But this is how learners can log in. And there's also extensive validation protocols with our corporate clients. So when we think about Jiffy Lube and how they're validating individual learners and who gets credit, we take that very seriously because we are also thinking about you, the academic institutions, and you are trusting us to make sure that just because Tom so-and-so said he completed a course at Jiffy Lube, we don't take their word of mouth. We go through an extensive process. No, that's a great question. Transcripts are not free. So in order to establish a record, it's $20. And then the first transcript's free, or basically by establishing that record it's $20. And then additional transcripts are $15 each. Okay,
Michele,
so try again.
Michele, could you say that link again? We have somebody that's not. Oh, they've got it. Never mind.
Sure. I saw Carla. Great. And sometimes what we're finding is with the adventures of, are you using IE? Are you using Chrome? Are you using Mozilla? Are you using Firefox? Just play around with browsers. Make sure you have the most current. ACE does push us to maintain the most current standards. We found some of our colleagues were using old versions of Internet Explorer, and neither the military site or the corporate site were pulling up. So again, let your fingers do the walking. Good job. Thanks for jumping in. So here we are. We're going to play with a government example because I think that does create confusion. It's a great question. I'm really glad that Mary hunted me down and Sarah hunted me down and said, hey, can you help us have a conversation on this? Because Defense Information School sounds very military, right? Yeah? Am I seeing some head shakes out there and some hand raises? So if you pull up the National Guide and you scroll on the very bottom to the D's, and then you click on Defense Information School, it's going to pop up their portal, their inventory. And here's what you get. You get a description of what is the Defense Information School. What's the link to their website so you can learn more information about this agency. And then in this box down below is the entire list of courses that have been evaluated. So you can kind of see that and look through and see if there's anything that populates if you happen to have an ACE transcript. What I'm recommending is let's go ahead and all pick on this basic communications course and see what happens. Da, 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 da. An exhibit pops up. And in this exhibit, you're going to see basically very similar data elements to once we get and explore the military guide here for just in a little short second. But you're going to get more information than what you actually see on the transcript. Again, transcript is supposed to be a short synopsis, make it easy for you to take a look at. In the National Guide, you're going to possibly see a drop-down button. And this drop-down button is going to show you the exhibit versions. In other words, has it been evaluated? What's the start date? What's the end date? Almost like a college catalog when you think about course curriculum and programs. And then you can also, at the very bottom of this page, print the exhibit for this course that we just did, this Basic Mass Communication Specialist course. And when you print that, you're going to get a full PDF of the entire history of that course. So if there's 10 versions, you're going to get all 10 versions. In this case, you're going to get 2 versions. So because the Defense Information School is not owned by a specific branch of service, Education and Training Command, it is joint service. There are a Department of Defense. Think about your military learners. If somebody went to Defense Information School and took this Basic Mass Communication Specialist, maybe he or she was an Army soldier, he may have a military transcript and an ACE transcript with these credit recommendations on it. Ooh, expanding that learning portfolio. I am pausing to see if there are any questions popping through. We are having some conversations about how we can create some alignment in terms of the search functionality from our corporate clients to our military Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Coast Guard, and Air Force exhibits so that you, the institutions, don't have to learn multiple complex data tools. So we hear you. We hear you roar. You would like to see some synergies happen so that we can make it a little easier for you on the user end of the spectrum. I'm pausing to see if there are any questions. Oh, I see a great one coming in. Somebody noticed version dates, where there's a version date started and then there's an end date of 2020 already populated from 17 to 2020. On the corporate side of the house, evaluations have to be completed every 3 years. So when the data are loaded into the tool, basically a start date and end date are already populated. And that's also a mechanism to support, for example, Defense Information School or Jiffy Lube, to better track what needs to be evaluated and what needs to be reevaluated in cycles. So great question. Thanks for throwing that out there. Pausing, looking for other questions, popping through the Q&A before we jump into JST. All right, let me ask the questions. That's a great question, Andrew. Are service members aware that they may have an ACE transcript along with a JST? It's highly possible they know. It's highly more probable they don't know. It's a great question. That's why it takes all of us when we're doing the high-touch advising and coaching and mentoring, student success support work. We need to ask those robust questions. How has learning occurred on your journey? Where have you learned in formal and informal ways? So Joint Services Transcript, raise your hand if you actually have an account. You are a user of the Joint Services Transcript and you have to log in to jst.doded.mil and remember the password that is 1,000,000 characters long. Sorry, I can't change that. This is a government system. Side note, just a reminder for those of you who may have been Service Members Opportunity College's DNS, Degree Network System institutions, we know that that program was sunsetted effective the end of March of 2019. So the government has moved to a new program model called Career Path Decide, so keep your eyes out for some more robust dynamic support work there. So we've already talked about Community College of the Air Force. They're regionally accredited and where to go. You now know where to help guide service members and veterans to get their ACE transcript if they have some training from a DoD joint school or even on the corporate side of the house. Think about the FAA, how robust that may be for airframe and mechanics. Now for JST, a little bit of intel on the data complexity here. First and foremost, the Joint Service Transcript is owned by each branch of service. This is not an ACE transcript. We collaborate to evaluate the learning that's occurring. We load those learning evaluations in the ACE guide. We support quality assurance, quality control checking of transcripts, but we do not own the transcripts. So you'll hear me say Army JST, Marine JST, Navy JST, Coast Guard JST. And in some cases, great question popping through, an Air Force member may have attended an Army school and that would not present on that Air Force member's CCAF transcript. So that Air Force member may have a JST. They can submit a service ticket to jst@doded.mil and say, hey, I have a Army learning experience, and JST operations will create a transcript for that airman. Oh, I know, I'm making it more complex. Does your head hurt? In addition to the data that we load in the ACE guide, that is the evaluations information, each branch of service has their own kind of registraring system. Think about Banner, PeopleSoft, DataTel, right? Managing their academic records, their training and education command. So we talked about that centralized authority. So I saw a bunch of Army veterans that sent up a whoop whoop, right? Raise the hand. Army veterans, the Training and Education Command has a system called ATARS, Army Training and Readiness Systems. Yep. So each service also manages separate databases for that service member's individual record. So you're seeing this star alignment that the service individual records, the registering system, the data from the guide all have to populate and synchronize perfectly in order for the credit recommendations to present on the joint services transcript. Highly complex. Pausing to see if there are any questions coming through. I know that registrars across the country, their transcripts are always perfect. Every now and again there may be a hiccup or a data error. Sometimes there's a field that might be missing from an individual service member's record. Sometimes there might be a hiccup in the course numbering in the registering system. So ACE spends a lot of time working with those centralized authorities to make sure everything is in perfect match so that we have the most accurate JSTs possible. If ever you notice a service member that has a hiccup, they should log into the portal and submit a service ticket, or simply send a smoke signal to jst@doded.mil. Never including personal information in an email, which is why we highly recommend if you're working with a service member or a veteran, they log in and put in a service ticket if they've noticed an error on a transcript or something looks wonky. Now, with the Joint Services Transcript, again, that's a synopsis. So in order to get the more robust, detailed information in what we call the exhibit, you have to let your fingers do the walking to the military guide. This does look a little different than our sister guide, the National Guide, and we do have our courses in one domain and occupations in a separate domain. So if you're trying to search for a course in the occupation button, trust me, I've tried it. It is not going to work. So let's pretend you're following along, and if you want to play, minimize me. I'm all good. Go to acenet.edu/military guide. Let's do a little search courses and see what happens. You push that green button. And I just want to remind you there is a use of data statement on our home page. These data belong to the Department of Defense. These evaluation data are not owned by the American Council on Education. So we ask you to use these data with integrity and compliance and security in all way, shape, or form to best support our military-connected learners. So as we're getting ready to run a query report, we hit Search Courses. So far, so good. There are multiple fields within our Search Courses functions that you can deep dive into. How many of you, when you have a transcript, just search by ACE ID? Because every time ACE evaluates a course, we assign an ID number to it. Yeah, great. And the reason is military course numbers are very interesting. We don't always have a rhyme or reason, and they can be a lot of characters. So that's one simple way to run a search. This is a relational database, so less is more. This center section, if you think about the stakeholders that are using this tool, we've got military schoolhouses, like we talk about the centralized training and education commands. We have learners. We have you, the academic institutions. Most of our academic institutions strictly stick with ACE ID, or they'll look at a list of when, by the team review date, when did ACE faculty evaluate courses? Or we look at course subject areas and by level. Sometimes institutions may be co-located near a specific military installation. Let's say down in Virginia, one of the institutions is real close to Norfolk. They want to focus on Navy because they see a lot of Navy transcripts. So they may just do a drop-down search for Navy only. But military course number, military course title, school location, this is really functions for the military schoolhouses and for our service members because they know those data and particulars. So let's pretend we're doing a search together, and you want to see what has ACE been up to between the periods of October 2018 and March of 2019. So you populate the review, team reviewed. When did the faculty evaluators last touch those courses? So you populate those fields, always 2 digits / 4 digits. So if you have a 3, it actually needs to be 03 to the 019. I threw that in as a monkey wrench just to see if we had any issues hitting that search function. I know I'm tricky. I'm tricky that way. So once you hit that search, you will find 131 courses were evaluated during that period. Now each of these columns here, this ACE ID, the start date, the end date, the team review date, are all searchable. You'll see little arrow indexes here, so you can search it up and down. You can also then select Download List up here in the far corner. And when you hit that download list, it's going to export for you to an Excel file. So let me pause. Let me just do a sanity check. How many of you used that search function, knew it was there? Tell us something new, Spires. That's not anything we didn't know. How many of you already use that search function? I'm waiting for the raised hands. Did we learn something new today? So we are working with the government. Great. I like it. Thanks for playing. We are working with the government to see how we can expand our search functions and capabilities, because right now it's limited and controlled, because again, these data are owned by the Department of Defense. So right now in this export list you get ACE ID, course number, the team review date, basically your registering information. What you do not get are the alignment of the subject area credit recommendations or the learning outcomes. So I'm sure that may be on a wish list, and watch for new information coming soon for that. In addition to searching, and I would invite you to play around with this while we're chatting and playing, you can limit your search to current course data. You can search just by ACE ID, and you can also limit, because as a military course is undergoing review and re-review, we are tracking versions. And that helps to align the current curriculum, almost like a current college catalog, to the versions of the evaluations. Because somebody that took a course in 2006 in technology, that same military course in 2019 is probably going to look a little different, right? Things have changed. Also, if you're trying to do course subject search, this is Boolean search. So if you want to look at project management, you have to do project plus management in order to align the credit recommendations course subject. Military course titles are deceiving. Rarely do you see project management in a course title. So you want to focus on the outcomes. Where are the subject area credit recommendations? You can also narrow that by level. So if you're a community college and you just want to look at lower division credit recommendations or upper division, that's fine too. I'm pausing to see if there are any questions coming through. Kind of a fast and furious overview on searching these courses, using that military guide to deep dive into what you see on a joint services transcript. Now, we have evolved. I didn't even put the 1954 exhibit up. I just went back to 2006. In 2006, the academic institution said, hey, we need to understand the related competencies that support the learning outcome recommendations. And then in 2015, you said, yeah, that's all well and good, but we really want the military exhibit in the military guide to look more like a course syllabus. So we broke out the overall course description, we added passing scores, methods of assessment, and we took each area credit recommendation and built out learning outcomes to support that. We are now in the process of cleaning this up in a way that can evolve a data taxonomy so that you can get your arms around a better understanding of what is lower division management and the learning outcomes to the ACE evaluation process. So we're making great strides there. You'll see more news moving ahead in that domain. All right. On the occupation side of the house, the job is the evaluation of credit in alignment, which is really challenging when you think about, what is it that you've learned on the job above and beyond formal classroom training? Is there enough breadth, depth, and scope of that learning on the job to align to academic credit recommendations? Again, a quick snapshot of taking that 2006 subject area credit recommendation and aligning the competencies to things like public speaking and supervision, the credit recommendation areas by pay grade or skill level. Evolved in 2016 to taking, here's the credit recommendations, and then aligning the learning outcomes to support and justify the credit recommendations. I'm pausing. I'm looking for some questions that come in. Yeah, great question coming in. Do we see the potential for aligning not only learning outcomes but potential competencies and kind of integrating? We're working with our partners on that credit side of the house, on that transcript project, to look at workforce competencies and national taxonomies. I could see that parlaying over beautifully to the occupation review process. So potentially for a military connected learner, there could be credit recommendations for academic credit, but also for workforce competencies like critical thinking, project management, that maybe are workforce related but not breadth, depth, and scope for an academic course. So great question. Thanks so much for that. Snapshot while you're thinking about questions to post to me. When you think about the academic diversity, the subject area credit recommendations that occurred over fiscal year 18, which would be thinking about 1 October to 30 September. We have a little bit of everything: aeronautics, athletic training, to surge tech and sonology, health sciences. It's very interesting when you think about the academic needs. Now, each branch of service has their liaison. You've now learned that. So this is going to ebb and flow based on the needs of the military education and training commands. Probably the only thing I have never seen us really need on the military side of the house is Montessori education. And then there are days it makes you wonder, But training and education is really falling under human resources, talent management. It's not as much curriculum and instruction in the more formalized sense of either elementary education or post-secondary education and curriculum. So kind of fun just to take a sneak preview at that. Are we good so far? Let me see the hands up. Everybody's hanging on? I like it. All right, so let's take a snapshot look at some official JSTs for fiscal year 2018. And this is just kind of some insights. When you think about your military connected learners, who they are, what branch of service they represent, what are their backgrounds, what are the credentials they are pursuing, whether it's a degree, a certificate, a couple of courses, what are their goals, what are their learning journeys. Here's a snapshot of official transcripts transmitted from fiscal year 18, 422,000, almost 423,000 official transcripts. And it kind of shows each branch of service in comparison from fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 17. Now, this was really funny. All you Army veterans out there, let me see you again. Let me see that yellow highlight up with those hand raises. I was in a meeting. You'll appreciate this. And somebody asked a question, well, how come the Army has so many transcripts? And the Army liaison said, well, we are the biggest service, right? Do I hear it? I hear it. When you look at moving forward, the JST comparison by status, by service, and this is important, why and how, active versus separated. So those of you who know you're working with those active service members, that JST that you receive may not be their only JST that you receive, right? They pin on rank, they take new courses, so there's more learning that's occurred in their record. For me, this was really telling when you think about for active versus separated for fiscal year 18, and it tells a story that for Marine Corps, more separated official JSTs are sent than for active. For Army, definitely active JSTs, official JSTs are sent in comparison to separated. Navy's pretty balanced. Coast Guard is hard to see, but they're still pretty much more active versus separated. That's why I threw the numbers in, because the pie chart wasn't happening. And again, even though technically we don't have an Air Force JST for those Air Force members who have completed learning, maybe with the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, or Coast Guard, that would not be reflected on their Joint Services transcript, JST operations will create a transcript. So Andrew, I think you asked the question earlier about service members aware that they may have an ACE transcript. They may not be aware, airmen may not be aware that they might also have a JST because of their other service training that they completed with joint services. So we have to do the diligence and help ask those questions. All right, here's another interesting tidbit. Moving on. Here are the top 15 states receiving official JSTs for fiscal year 2018. Dun, dun, dun. Take a look at that. I'm just looking to see if there's any surprises out there, any questions, anything that jumps out at you. Of course, we know that there's some natural things like Texas is just a big old military state, so yep, that makes a lot of sense. There we are with some of you out there. Illinois, So moving forward, you think about 422,000, almost 423,000 official transcripts were transmitted, and to the top 15 states, almost 323,000. It's just insightful. It's just a little bit of data to kind of help you percolate, and maybe to think about, piggybacking on Katie's presentation, the last webinar hosted by MCMC, the power of data and what we know about our military connected learners. Another key component to think about is their pay grade comparison. Are they what we call entry level E1 to E4? Are they mid-level E5 to E6? Or are they a more senior, executive level E7 to E9? Where are those learners coming to your programs, and what are the backgrounds that they're bringing? Are they active? Are they separated? So this just breaks down kind of a sample snapshot looking at that pay grade just by the numbers. Here's another visual representation kind of looking at that E1 to E4, combining all services, active, separated, and then the total. So just some interesting data metrics to kind of help get you thinking about what you're going to do next working with those military learners. Here's another insider intel snippet of information. If you have military members who have medical backgrounds and maybe they went, I'm sure some of you have heard about METC, Medical Education and Training Campus at Fort Sam, right? A lot of Air Force owns the consolidated components of the training, and then Army soldiers and Navy sailors might go off into their unique training experiences, med lab technician for example. Because those Army soldiers and those Navy sailors participated in an Air Force owned component of that enlisted training for med lab tech, those soldiers and sailors are also eligible for a Community College of the Air Force transcript. Andrew, I hear you screaming right now because there's a lot of potential out there for transcripts for our military connected learners. So again, just another pie chart as a visual shaping out that E1 to E4. They're a pretty big piece of the pie. If we were in a group and I could see your faces and we could have a conversation, I would probably say, what does that tell you? The E1 to E4 transcript is definitely limited in what's going to be on there because of years of service, and will not be as robust as what you see with that E7 to E9 or even the E5 to E6. I'm looking. Mary, do you see any other questions coming in that we might need to address before we move into our wrap-up and final conclusions?
Nope, I don't see any.
They're so quiet today. All right. For those of you who are still interested in better understanding the rigor and integrity of our review process, I'm inviting you to a free webinar. Free. Did I say free? I meant free. On the 20th of June. We're going to have George Ford and Jeanette White, two of our faculty who go out and serve on review teams, participate in this conversation. There's a bit of a focus on our engineering fields, but the rigor and integrity in which the evaluations occur are the same across disciplines. It also plants a seed. These faculty, George and Jeanette, would also serve on our credit reviews. So the integrity and the depth in which we are evaluating the learning that's occurring, collaborating with the faculty to produce the write-ups, and using rubrics for assessment and analysis, that consistency is across the framework. So make a note if you're available. It will be recorded. I also like to talk about student cases and potential for student success. Sometimes it's really easy to kind of get caught up in the everyday shenanigans of our work and the business of it all. And we just had our 101st anniversary. I'm not that old, by the way. ACE is 101 years old. And we do a Student of the Year. And so we have 2 Students of the Year. This is Sophia. This is Brendan. And they were our recipients. Brendan happens to be an Army veteran, former MP. I hear some whoop whoops going on out there from our Army veterans. These are the videos from their awards acceptance, but this panel right here was really powerful. It was moderated by John King. It had a discussion about learning. It had 2 other students. So here we had Brendan, who is a former Army MP learner, went through Georgia, sitting next to a former inmate prisoner on his learning journey. So if you have some good time, pop up the video, take a look at it. It's pretty refreshing and pretty insightful. So as we're coming into a final wrap-up and final questions, I share with you a picture of my, not quite my backyard, but close to my backyard from home in Colorado Springs. What questions do you have? And I'm looking into the chat box about the data, about the transcripts, about the resources. And hopefully I didn't create more confusion by showcasing all the potential combinations that our military-connected learners could have, but showcase the opportunities for many of our military-connected learners to demonstrate their knowledge. All right. Ms. Mary, I think it's back to you to kind of see where we are in terms of wrap-up questions and what are the next steps.
All right, thank you, Michele.
Oh, I see a hand raised.
Oh, okay.
Let's see if a question comes in.
Oh, there we go.
Oh! I heard of a change involving the requirements of institutions to request JSTs and CCAF records. My institution requests them but currently does not require them in order to complete the admissions application. We are working on changing this to mandate these records in order to complete the application, but can you confirm that this will be a mandate in the upcoming semester? Nicholas, on behalf of the American Council on Education, we never mandate your policies, practices, and protocols. It's up to each individual institution. Now there are some states, I was just working with Wisconsin, right, and the technical colleges in the state of Wisconsin, that there are new legislations that the community colleges must accept ACE credit recommendations and review joint services transcripts. So in terms of looking at that policy, we had a day-and-a-half workshop on how do we get technical, how does that work, what needs to happen. And my role was to facilitate the experience and understanding the review process and the resources available. Some institutions are using an application, instead of saying check here if you're a veteran, they're using a more generic, broader approach about military service to just try to start to capture the data and metrics early on in that process to better inform their advisor team who moves next. But Mary, you may have some other examples you want to share on that since you've been working across states with multiple institutions.
Sarah would be the expert there, so I would defer to her, and unfortunately she's not here, but we do have another question.
That's okay. Yeah, absolutely. When are ACE test credits showing on a student's JST? Is it appropriate to also request students to send an official ACE transcript? Okay, so that's a great question. When you dissect that ACE transcript, the official parts are the evaluation of the courses, and then we of course have the experience. There's going to be an other learning experiences section where maybe courses that haven't been evaluated for one reason or another. And then on that joint services transcript is the test scores. And that could be where maybe the learner took a CLEP test or a DSST. When I don't have any concrete Katie approved validated research. But in my anecdotes of working with institutions across the country, many institutions use that joint services transcript score and those test results as an advising function, but still require the official transcript from Prometric, from CLEP, as part of the records and applying credit recommendations. So great question. You can also use the national guide to look at really getting into the CLEP analysis. So for example, looking at English Comp, I just worked with another institution on this. It gets into the psychometric details, the validity, the reliability. So if you go back into that national guide that we looked at earlier today, and you pull up CLEP and you look at those exhibits, wow, that's a lot of information that may also help inform credit recommendations in the CUT scores. Casey, yes, I was just in Wisconsin. There's new legislation. The state sponsored a workshop to help the technical colleges come together that they must accept ACE credit recommendations. Now here's the thing. There's wiggle room in there, right, in terms of how much do you accept? Is it applicable? How is it evaluated? What are the process points? And so the 16 technical colleges came together to have some conversations with the state leadership from the system to help maybe guide some practices, policies, and procedures. So that's some policy underway. Tennessee has legislation. Colorado has some legislation. So we're seeing some trends evolve in that way to kind of encourage a broader discussion on prior learning assessment and how institutions are leveraging prior learning assessment as part of an individual learner's package and portfolio, their learning journey. Great questions. All right, we're watching the chat, huh, Mary? Seeing if anything else comes in. Why don't we, if you have a question that you're queuing up, put your hand up so we know it's coming and we'll watch for it. All right, Mary, back to you.
I'll just remind folks that you can get to our past webinars on the mec.org/MCMC of our website. We also like to share any stories that are happening in your institutions in our region and around the nation. So if you have anything you'd like to share, please join in the conversation. And then as I mentioned, my colleague Sarah Appel is unfortunately not able to be with us today, but here is her contact information. She is the MCMC manager.
I'm going to push us back, Mary, to the join the conversation. I think that's really important. As I wrap up in my final contributing thoughts and words of wisdom or non-wisdom, those stories that are connected to your military learners and the success, that's why I shared the videos of our military learners and our civilian learner, are so compelling. They help keep us at the mind of how do we move forward. So Casey, when you're thinking about the technical colleges in Wisconsin, how do we drive forward and do the heavy lifting? We think about our learners and their learner success. So thanks for leading the success conversation on Facebook so we can kind of see what's going on and keep that at the forefront of our vision. So it's about the vision and the support, not the personal agenda on the day-to-day.
Perfect. Thanks, Michelle. Well, I don't see any other questions, and I just want to be mindful of folks' time. So I think we'll just wrap it up here, and thanks everybody for participating. Have a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you so much.